record. Okay, welcome everybody to the first 2019 SIG API Machinery meeting. Daniel Smith is out, so I'll facilitate here really quick. We got 4 agenda items. We had none yesterday, so these have all been added quite recently. I reordered a couple of them since I wasn't sure how long the design discussion would take. But let's just go ahead and get started. Jordan, are you here?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, go ahead.
So initializers were introduced in 1.7 as an alpha feature. They have not progressed since then. There were quite a few known issues that needed to be resolved when they were introduced, and really very little traction has been made in those. And in the meantime, the webhook admission extension points have, in most cases, removed the need for these. For the past several releases, we've talked about removing this alpha feature, and given that there are no plans to graduate it, I think we should go ahead and remove it for a few reasons. One, it makes it clear that people shouldn't start building on this assuming it's going to graduate. Second, if you look at the pull request that's in progress that removes this, there's a lot of pretty complicated, complex, difficult to understand logic kind of tangled up in uninitialized objects around admission and storage. And so getting that out of the code base for a feature we don't plan to graduate, I think would be beneficial. There is an in-flight proposal around namespace initialization specifically, which is sort of taking some of the useful bits from this feature, or some of the things we wanted from this feature, and trying to make them available for namespaces specifically, but not for all objects generally. If you look at that proposal, it is actually proposing a namespace-specific field, which I think matches the intent of that to be a namespace-specific feature. And so I don't see that as a blocker for removing the metadata initializers alpha field. I guess the two considerations that we might want to discuss here, Cloud Controller Manager has an alpha controller that was built on top of this function. And so to use it, you would have needed to enable the alpha feature and set up an initializer configuration. And so removing this removes the ability of that controller to function. I think Andrew from SIG Cloud Provider was on the call. I don't know if you want to speak to sort of where that controller is at and what effect this would have.
Yeah, I'm here. So to add some context, so this controller was added in the Cloud Controller Manager to replace the persistent volume label admission controller. So that is still it's disabled by default now and it's deprecated, but it's still there for I believe GCE, AWS, OpenStack, and Azure.
Which is disabled? The admission
controller. Yeah, the plugin.
Okay.
So this out-of-true controller was meant to replace that, and it was under the assumption that, like, you know, a few releases down, like all the clusters would run Cloud Controller Manager. Obviously that's, you know, going along a lot slower than we thought. So kind of both are there in tree and out of tree. So I noticed your PR removes the controller in the PVL controller in the Cloud Controller Manager, which I'm not sure is gonna work for all the cloud providers right now. So one other option is, like, we can leave the controller but just have it not check initializers but something else. But I'm not sure like how much work that's gonna be. I have to talk to the maintainers of those providers to find out.
Okay, so I will add an action item to that PR to decide whether it should remain a controller and check something else, or whether it should become an admission webhook.
Yeah, that seems like pretty good next steps.
Okay. And then Clayton in the PR as well asked if we wanted to preserve the field in metadata. but simply empty it. So today, if you submit an object with this field populated and you don't have the alpha feature enabled, it gets cleared and not persisted. And so he was asking, do we want to keep that behavior? And the only reason I can think of for doing that is because of kube control client-side validation. If you are submitting an object that has this initializers field set in the manifest, kube control client-side validation will not complain because this alpha field shows up in the OpenAPI spec.
And not complain, like if you're using kube control create F and you have a file and it says initializers null or initializers empty array, it will start failing when we remove this field. So any automation you have running kube control create -F that somehow got the initializers field in it will start breaking silently all over the entire world when you upgrade your cluster. And it is an alpha field. I was afraid that, and we should maybe do a quick review, but I am afraid that there are tools and or processes that have put initializers null or initializers empty string into YAML files in the real world, at which point the removal of it would break them.
Also, I think the initializers in the types.go, in its comment, nowhere it's claimed as an alpha field. So maybe for backward compatibility consideration, we should just keep the field.
It's a field that doesn't have anything wired up to it. It was a system field anyway for an alpha feature. If someone was using it as an off-label thing, I don't feel super sorry for them.
I mean, it wouldn't persist.
Yeah.
The fact that it's not persisting, I think, is I think that limits it to, do we want to run the risk of breaking automation around kube control create for the percentages of people that might have gotten the initializers field into their generated YAML somehow?
But there's an easy fix for that anyway, right? You just remove it from your config.
Yeah, but the easy fix is this is an automation loop in GitOps, and it silently starts breaking. And my worry would be, I think the risk is low. It will silently break in automation. That is why we have API compatibility, is to not cause those breaks. Which is this runs the risk.
I mean, if we say that we can't remove an alpha field for this reason, that basically means we can't ever remove any alpha field ever.
And so another option would be it shows up in the validation for 2 releases, but we drop it from the API objects. So like,
why would it be safer to drop 2 releases from now?
Well, we would take it out and we would announce and make sure we're communicating, which again, like it's in general, like dropping an alpha API over 1 release immediately or over multiple releases where we at least do a due diligence and going out there and fleshing it out. Like,
I don't know. It's an alpha field someone had to opt in to turn on.
They didn't have to opt in to start adding it to their config YAML, though.
I think making removal of an alpha field stretch over multiple releases is probably not necessary. I think it's worth an announcement and prominent advertisement in the release notes, but I don't think we should start taking multiple releases.
Is this the first time we've ever removed an alpha field?
No.
What was the other one?
Node config. The name of the field changed, so we dropped the old one and added the new one with a different schema.
And that one's not typically something someone would have in application. I mean, again, like this is on every object in the entire system. The odds that no one in the community has been like, oh, I'll just reuse the Kube API, public API objects, and do it is low. But we can test that at least. I'm only bringing this up. This has the potential to break people silently, which is explicitly why we don't do this. And even though it's alpha,
I mean,
the fact that we didn't flag the field as alpha It's definitely not good. We can fix that later, but we should keep the API backward compatibility, I think, because the field is not flagged as alpha.
I'm not sure what compatibility means there. We're not preserving the data. Continue ignoring it silently. That, like I said, if we say we want to do that indefinitely, I'm not sure I think it's worth it in this case, but that's a decision we can make. If we say we want to ignore it for a couple releases, I don't see what would be different a couple releases from now. So,
well, if we remove it from the internal types, but it's still in the Swagger spec, then anybody who updates an ecosystem tool that just happens to be generating
this
this.
is object meta. There is no internal type.
No. The external type that we publish, when people import that, they will stop writing. I don't think it has emit empty. So they'll stop writing null and they'll stop writing empty array.
It did have emit empty.
It did? Okay. Yeah, the fact that it had emit empty means the Go stuff is safe. And if someone started saying this in another language, I would start to fall into the it's not a breaker.
Yeah, I think API deprecation policy is just announce it, put it in documentation, and wait to release and remove it, something like that. So we can just follow that for the field itself only.
We could change the type to a string array, which would prevent people from sending data. And
that's changing the type is super wacky. That would scare me more than just leaving it in place with a comment saying this is dead, don't use it.
This is we are impacting our ecosystem. We have the announcement, but the reality is that no one reads release notes for tools that are embedded. But is there
like I said, if we make this decision, what we're basically saying is you can't remove an alpha field because the considerations for this apply to any alpha field.
This is a field that is in every single object in the entire Cube ecosystem. The node one wasn't. So I'm not saying that, I agree with the principle, it's just scope, risk, and it seems more likely to break people.
I have two questions. Can we not have alpha fields in the open API if the feature is disabled, so that we would know before removing the field? Like if you never enable the feature, you would never allow the field in the first place?
Yeah, our open API generation doesn't allow for conditional inclusion. I was trying to experiment with that to have some way of annotating fields to be like, this field depends on this feature, so exclude it from the spec. But today, like every field is in the spec, regardless of whether the feature is enabled or not.
I mean,
we could also annotate with an extension or whatever.
We could fix kube control to.
That was my secret.
Yeah.
We could the validation from the client.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Like fix the validation in one release and then remove the field in the next release, which would fit with kube control deprecation. But again, it's a useful exercise. This is the first time we've ever removed an alpha field that touches every object.
What is the right forum to make a decision on this? Is it involve more people? Is it do more research? What do you think?
I think this is the right forum. Do we have all the stakeholders? It sounds like there's a couple people that are particularly interested in the details of this. Maybe we could handle that offline and see if we can reach a conclusion that way.
Come up with a document so we can all take some time to think about it.
Yeah, maybe just write this particular issue of the field deprecation up shortly and discuss it there online asynchronously.
Yeah, anything we decide should go into the API deprecation docs as well.
Okay. Okay. We'll talk about the field deprecation plan. We'll talk about it asynchronously, and we'll get this into the API docs. Antoine.
Sure. Hi. So I want to talk about server-side apply. We have about 5 weeks before the freeze. and we want to move the PR from the feature branch back into master before February, since we would like to release alpha in 1.14. We have currently opened a PR on master with the feature, which is not complete yet. Thank you. It's missing the CRD support. We're working on that right now, but we would like to have early feedback on what we've done so far. That's it.
I would like to add that it's a fairly approachable poll. It's only about 8,000 lines long. So that was actually said in seriousness, not
No,
it's
I
a
know.
big feature, 8,000. I thought I heard someone snicker. 8,000 lines is a very reasonable amount. So
One thing, is there anything we should be aware of? Like, the PR didn't have a ton of context. Is there anything we should be aware of in the PR about in-flight things, and can we link to it if there is, or just make a quick comment? And then can the vendor stuff be split out into its own commit? That was the two things I had.
The vendor has a lot of value because it's where most of the code lives, actually. Because we've done a lot of the development in a different repo, which is vendor in Kubernetes. So I think it makes sense to have this vendor code with the PR, or at least maybe in the same commit. I could make a different commit if you want.
Yeah, just so I can stage it. Like, it's 8,000 is a lot to do in one commit.
Yeah.
On the other hand, to that point, are there two classes of vendor code, like actual vendor code and your stuff? And can we make it very clear which is which?
So the thing is that this is not the definitive PR. I'm going to have to do it again in 2 or 3 weeks, hopefully. I don't want to spend 2 weeks preparing this PR instead of doing what I want to be doing.
Sure.
To do it in 2 or 3 weeks.
Like,
I can split quickly. Yeah.
I mean, if you at least identify which vendor repo is worth looking at.
Yeah. I can do a short separation, yes.
Yeah, we have a general 8,000 including vendor. I agree. I want all the useless stuff out of it so I don't miss anything important. That was the only thing I had.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
All right, great.
One thing to think about too, on the tails of the last discussion, is that this would be an alpha field that would touch every object, and so just kind of thinking through what would we do if we didn't want this to progress? Like, are there things we can do now as we're introducing it to avoid being in the same position as we are with the initializers? So
sounds like at least making sure that it's documented as alpha.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe Antoine, you can jump on the field deprecation from the previous one and weigh in there and keep up on the conversation.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, let's talk about, there was a design proposal for flexible layered in flight request limiting distribution. This just came in, so I don't think we're actually deciding on the doc, but we are announcing that it exists.
yeah, I'd like to give a brief overview.
Okay.
Yui is a community member. He's done a fair amount of work in API Machinery before, and he asked me whether there was something particularly useful he could work on. And this relates back to some conversations that we've had with Doug Davis, amongst others, about API fairness. Yui went out and did some research about how TC works in the networking stack, and his draft reflects a lot of that approach in it, with a set of ordered classes that have a certain amount of assured capacity and then have shared capacity on top of that for a C-link. And if you're interested in how he's proposing those pieces work, I suggest reading the doc. It looks workable at a high level to me, and it's the best one I've seen for this topic. And I expect in 2 weeks we're going to have a more detailed discussion about this doc, its merits, and how we think it could be integrated.
Great, thanks, David. And it sounds like, I mean, some of us had been on the CAP that predated this, and it sounds like it's incorporated a lot of feedback from that. So I guess the action item for everybody here is there's a link to the doc. Please read it. Please add comments. Please think of considerations that need to be incorporated. Okay, looks like we've got one more. We've got something from the Long-Term Stability Working Group. Dawal, are you here?
Hey, hi. Yes, I'm here. Hi guys, I'm Double. I am one of the co-organizers or co-chairs for the working group LTS, and you can see in this doc, in the notes doc, a link for a pull request that you want to add working group LTS and the charter of the working group LTS, and we need approval. I mean, as you can see in the charter, we think that we need a lot of stakeholders feedback for the working group, and we think the charter of working group is spread across different SIGs, and we think that SIG API Machinery is one of the key SIGs that we need approval from. I'm not sure how many of you are aware of this, but if you look historically, time and again, different types of stakeholders, users of Kubernetes, contributors, maintainers of Kubernetes have different points have come out and mentioned that the release cadence of Kubernetes is not suitable, or we do not understand the version skew, or we need wider version skew. We need API stability. There are various problems that people have described on different platforms. Stack Overflow, or group, the mailing list, the SIGs meetings, etc. And I think at one point we thought that there needs to be a working group that creates a platform for everyone to come and discuss the problems and come out with a solution. The working group, the uniqueness of this working group is that we have a charter on this, whereas by the working group governance does not require you to have a charter. The reason for the charter is we think the working group needs to be timely, and we need to have specific goals that we can achieve, and you can go through the charter there, that's linked on the pull request, and provide your comments. And yeah, I'm open for questions if anybody wants to make any comments on this, and I'm so happy that I got to introduce this to all of you.
Great. Is there anybody on SIG API Machinery that's already following this?
I made a comment on it already.
Okay.
I took a look at it, and I don't actually have strong opinions.
Okay.
One way or the
All right. So
Jordan, I think you're attending the meeting too.
Yeah, I've been involved in the meetings.
okay. And are there specific things? It sounds like looking at the charter is one of the first things you wanted. Are there specific things you're hoping to encourage SIG API Machinery to do to get involved here?
So yes, go through the charter and let us know your comments on that. And LGTM is what we are looking for. We have lots of, the charter contains links to presentations and videos of what the working group wants to do when we started proposing it. And we have already started meeting every 2 weeks. The calendar invite, etc. If you should join the mailing list, I've also added the link to the mailing list to get the access to the meeting notes and the recordings of the meetings, and join the meetings if you have an opinion to share, if you want to have the representation. But frequently, like right now, we have a survey that we have planned. The questions for the survey are in a doc file, and we have requested comments from the community. We have sent docs across different mailing lists, including Kubernetes Dev for comments. We have received comments from wide audience, but participation is via docs, via attending meetings, whichever way you think you want to influence this, the work of this working group would be appreciated. For the starters, please go through the charter and see if you can give us the approval.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
I think that's it for our agenda. Did anybody else have any items that we should bring up? All right.
I had two small ones.
Sure.
So one was, Jordan and I just talked in the background, there was an issue, we continue to see issues where people ask about a load balancer in front of the API server for inside the cluster. I didn't know if there was anybody else who's followed along historically with our attempts to add multiple connection backends to the client library, but it is something that in the long run has some value. Part of the work we're doing with Client Go around, so there's a couple of places that have novel hooks around Client Go to do things like in the kubelet, we restart the connection pool to get a new client cert. in a few other places. We're reloading various bits of client Go code, at least in the next month or so. If anybody is tracking issues around client Go and dynamicism, changes that the client Go library should do, I wanted to kind of pull together the use cases and move forward with at least a something we could dock or put some better guidance around, like how you would do dynamism in client Go correctly, whether that's upstream. Someone's gonna say something.
Yeah, I was gonna say, you say dynamism. You're talking about things like, what if my CA bundle gets updated on disk? How do I react to that?
Yeah, Mike kind of was the first one who put something in, which is the client token reloading, and then Jordan and I went and kind of refined a little bit. The fact that Bootstrap has its own hack around getting the transport and reloading it is also a little scary. I want to get that cleaned up and get that in client Go. And then there's a couple of things around transports where if someone wanted to do this kind of pick a different backend, we tried to do that as a transport before it didn't work. I've been trying to clean up transports as part of the leader election step down stuff that Mike and I were working on. So I just want to, if anybody has any use cases around dynamism in the client Go library, please ping me. And I wanted to try and pull some thoughts together so we don't drift too much. And then the second one was, I had a brief discussion with Philip yesterday. We've been kind of poking around being able to make describe generic across. So it's one of the last things that's in the kubelet that's tied very heavily to types. And Jordan had kind of triggered this. We were complaining about describe, and he was like, it's basically just a really crappy YAML. And so something that Philip and I were just kind of brainstorming off of was, could we do server-side describe in a way that is roughly a fairly generic mechanism that fits well with CRDs and extensions. So I was gonna, if people have been thinking about describe, let me know. I'm gonna pull together a quick brainstorm Google Doc and share that with both SIG CLI and SIG API Machinery, just as to start the discussion maybe for a future release, because it's the last of the kube control type specific stuff that we're trying to kill.
Okay. Is there anybody that wants to jump in right now is interested in those two things? Otherwise, I think it would be best to just reach out to Clayton asynchronously for use cases or interest on those.
I did throw a couple issues for the cert rotation, and
oh yeah, I think I added some right now.
One of which you can tell by the number is extremely old. So that probably means this is an easy problem, right?
Yeah, totally.
Great. All right, anybody else? Any other last items? Ooh, we are right at 30 minutes. That is perfect. Okay, thank you, everybody. We will see you next time.